Welcome to Canada SR. If you've been watching the mainstream news lately, you've probably heard a very simplified version of what just happened in India. The headlines claim that Prime Minister Mark Carney went to Mumbai to slam Donald Trump's trade policies. But reducing this historic event to a mere political complaint completely misses the reality of what just occurred on the global stage. Mark Carney didn't fly halfway across the world just to express outrage over U.S. tariffs. He went to India to unveil a calculated multi-billion-dollar structural economic war. For months, Washington has used the threat of 10% or 15% baseline tariffs as leverage, expecting Canada to panic and beg for market access. But instead of folding, Canada is rewriting the rules of the game. Right out of the gate, speaking to the most powerful business leaders in India, Carney delivered a stark diagnosis of the New World Order. Listen very closely to how he defines the American economic threat, and more importantly, how Canada is choosing to respond.
And the fact is that over the past 2 decades, there's been a series of crises in finance, in health, in energy, and geopolitics that have laid bare collectively the risks of extreme global integration. And more recently, great powers have begun using economic integration as weapons, tariffs as leverage, financial infrastructure as coercion, supply chains as vulnerabilities to be exploited. And the multilateral institutions on which countries have relied, the WTO, the UN, the COP, that architecture of collective problem solving are all under threat. As a result of this, many countries are concluding that they must develop greater strategic autonomy. And that impulse is understandable. When the rules no longer protect you, you must protect yourself.
When the rules no longer protect you, you must protect yourself. That is not academic theory. That is the new official doctrine of the Canadian government. Let's break down exactly what this means, because this is where the competitor channels are missing the depth of the strategy. For generations, the United States and Canada operated under the assumption of mutual benefit. We relied on the World Trade Organization, the original NAFTA, and the USMCA. We relied on the rules. But Carney is officially declaring on the international stage that the era of rules-based protection is dead. The American market is no longer a guaranteed safe harbor. It has been transformed into a weapon designed to extract concessions. The Trump administration's entire strategy relies on a perceived asymmetry. They look at the map, they see the shared border, and they assume that Canada is effectively trapped. They believe that if they squeeze hard enough with tariffs, Ottawa will have no choice but to pay the toll. But Carney's speech in Mumbai proves that Canada is no longer adjusting to this volatility. Canada is building independent power. If a country cannot feed itself, fuel itself, or defend itself, it has no options. But in today's economy, as Carney pointed out, sovereignty requires much more. It requires access to critical minerals, artificial intelligence, clean energy, and space-based communications. Relying on a single dominant superpower for these strategic sectors, especially a superpower that uses tariffs as blackmail, is a fatal vulnerability. So, how does Canada fight back? How do you neutralize the leverage of the largest consumer market on Earth without firing a single shot? You don't do it with angry rhetoric. You do it with math. You do it with an aggressive, pro-sovereignty financial architecture. While the media focused on the geopolitical drama, the real bombshell of the Mumbai speech was the financial numbers. Carney announced the most aggressive pro-investment tax code strategy in modern Canadian history. This is how you defeat a 15% border tariff. Listen to the raw numbers Canada's throwing onto the global chessboard.
For example, we put in place what we call a super deduction, a broad-based 100% tax write-off for everything from manufacturing assets to intelligence infrastructure, R&D, clean energy, and EVs. And on top of this, we have instituted investment tax credits for across the clean electricity chain from critical minerals through to storage. These measures reduce our marginal effective tax rate for investment to just 13%. Let me translate that in relative terms. That's 4.5 percentage points below the U.S. level, and it is one half the G7 average.
A 13% marginal effective tax rate. This is the counterpunch that Washington did not see coming. This is the ultimate neutralizer. By slashing Canada's investment tax rate a full 4.5 percentage points below the United States and making it exactly half of the G7 average, Carney is directly attacking America's competitive advantage. Let's look at the mechanics of this strategy. Washington's threat relies on making it too expensive for companies to build in Canada and export to the U.S., but Ottawa's response is to fundamentally rewrite the corporate math. The Canadian government is telling global manufacturers, if you build your factories, your AI infrastructure, and your clean energy facilities in Canada, we will give you a 100% tax write-off. We will give you a tax rate so incredibly low that it completely absorbs the cost of any American tariff. Instead of reacting defensively to trade barriers, Canada is competing structurally. But a low tax rate is useless if companies are strangled by bureaucracy. For years, Canada unfortunately had a reputation for endless red tape, where major projects would die in regulatory limbo. That era is over. Carney announced that all major industrial projects will now be approved within 2 years. They are fast-tracking $1 trillion of investment in energy and critical minerals, and launching a new defense industrial strategy that will catalyze $500 billion over the next decade. While the United States is busy building economic walls to isolate itself, Canada is slashing red tape and building a massive, low-tax magnet to pull global capital directly into Canadian borders. But capital needs markets. If Canada is pivoting away from the United States, where do those exports go? That is exactly why this speech took place in Mumbai. India is not just a rising power, it is an economic titan. The human connections are already deeply established. 2 million Canadians trace their roots to India. Currently, there are 400,000 Indian students studying in Canada. That is double the number studying in the entire United States and 4 times the number in the UK. Now, the two governments are translating those human connections into hard economic leverage. They are actively negotiating a comprehensive economic partnership agreement, with the explicit goal of doubling two-way trade by 2030. They intend to sign this massive deal by the end of this year. This is part of a much wider strategy of global triangulation. In just 8 months, Canada has signed 20 trade and security deals across 4 continents. They are forming a buyers club for critical minerals with Australia and the European Union to break global monopolies. During the Q&A session in Mumbai, the contrast between the American and Canadian approaches to the global economy became crystal clear. Carney was asked about the anxiety surrounding Donald Trump's threats of a new 15% tariff. His response perfectly defined the difference between a leadership style that reacts to daily chaos and a leadership style that builds long-term resilience. Listen to this defining moment.
Who all want a positive agenda. They want to build. They want to move forward. They're confident. I mean, this to me, it describes India. It also describes Canada. And as opposed to being in a defensive world where you're waiting for the next tweet, and you're worried about your core economic relationships. No, build a relationship you can rely on for the long term. That lowers my worry level because there's just so much to do. And as an example, the scale of what's being discussed between Canada and India is a perfect illustration of that.
Stop waiting for the next tweet. Build a relationship you can rely on for the long term. In that single statement, Carney exposed the ultimate vulnerability of the America First agenda. Global capital, international trade, and major industrial investments all require one thing above all else: predictability. The United States is currently offering the world chaos by Twitter. They are offering sudden executive orders, weaponized tariffs, and a volatile environment where allies are treated as adversaries to be squeezed for every last dollar. Canada is offering the exact opposite. Ottawa is offering extreme stability, a 13% investment tax rate, a guaranteed 2-year approval process for massive projects, and long-term, value-based partnerships. This is not an anti-Trump strategy. This is a pro-sovereignty strategy. If access to the American market now comes with a ransom demand, Canada's response is to build 10 new markets. By aggressively expanding into the Indo-Pacific, the Middle East, and the European Union, Canada is effectively dismantling Washington's leverage. We are witnessing a profound geopolitical shift. Canada is no longer a dependent state adjusting its orbit to match the unpredictable gravity of Washington. Through the Mumbai Doctrine, Canada is creating its own gravitational pull. The old era of American economic dictation over the Canadian economy has ended, and it was replaced by a disciplined, relentless march toward global diversification. If you want analysis that cuts through the noise, ignores the political spin, and breaks down the real macroeconomic moves shaping Canada's future, this is where it happens. Make sure you subscribe to Canada SR and turn on those notifications so you stay ahead of the geopolitical chessboard as it unfolds. Now, I want to hear from you. Is the 13% investment tax rate and the 2-year project approval timeline enough to completely neutralize the threat of U.S. tariffs? Or should Canada be taking a different approach to deal with the Trump administration? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. We'll see you in the next video.